Story 1. Back in the day, I worked as a truck driver for a company that owned several trucks, each designated for specific types of jobs. Depending on the assignment, I often ended up driving 3 different trucks in a single day. Unfortunately, the company was notorious for its poor maintenance practices. Over the years, I received several fines for issues like outdated inspections. While the company always paid the fines, it was still frustrating. Eventually, their big truck became almost completely unusable. It was barely running and required thousands of dollars in repairs. I told the company I wouldn't drive it anymore because it was an accident waiting to happen. They didn't seem too concerned and brushed it off, saying it would be fine. For a week, I refused to take the truck out. Then they pressured me into driving it for just one delivery, insisting it was important. Reluctantly, I agreed, wanting to be a team player and not leave my customer hanging. That drive was an absolute nightmare. The truck left a plume of smoke so thick that it obscured the road behind me. The company had even loaded a case of motor oil into the cab, instructing me to refill the engine as needed, a major red flag. During the early morning drive, cars behind me had to turn on their high beams just to see through the smoke. Once the sun came up, drivers honked and gestured angrily as they passed me, and I couldn't blame them. Oil was leaking so heavily from the exhaust that it sprayed onto the vehicles behind me. By the time I completed the 50-mile round trip, the truck had burned through 24 quarts of oil and almost an entire tank of fuel. When I returned, I made it clear that I would not drive that truck again until it was properly repaired. As part of my job, I was required to conduct a pre-trip inspection of the vehicle every day. Any defects were recorded in the logbook, with 1 copy staying in the truck, another going to the company, and a third available for the Department of Transportation if requested. I filled this out meticulously, documenting every issue with the truck. I also kept a separate list for my own reference, noting problems that didn't necessarily fall under the pre-trip inspection, but were still important. The next day, I came to work and found the same truck loaded and ready to go. Once again, I refused to drive it. The company pushed back, telling me I had no choice. After thinking for a moment, I agreed, but not without a plan. Cue my act of malicious compliance. I pulled out of the lot and headed toward the traffic light. Instead of turning left to go to the job site, I turned right to stop at the fuel station first. And yes, this was a 33,000-pound truck with a gasoline engine, not diesel. Coincidentally, the Department of Transportation had set up a mobile inspection station just past the gas station. They were already eyeing my truck as I drove by, practically itching to pull me over. If you're unfamiliar, the Department of Transportation manages weigh stations on highways to ensure vehicles and drivers meet safety regulations. In busy trucking areas, they also conduct random inspections, verifying paperwork and checking vehicle conditions. Fines for violations can be steep, and they can even place a truck out of service, meaning it cannot be driven until it's repaired and officially cleared. At the fuel station, I could feel their eyes on me as I filled up the tank. Sure enough, as I pulled back onto the road, they flagged me down immediately. I complied, pulling into their inspection area and shutting off the truck. One of the inspectors approached, carrying a creeper, a mechanic's tool for sliding under vehicles. "Why do you need that?" I asked. He seemed surprised. "What?" "The creeper," I clarified. "I need to check your truck," he replied. I handed him my notes and logbook with a knowing smile. "No need. Everything you need is in here." The inspector took my documents and disappeared into his car, furiously writing for the next 30 minutes. When he returned, he asked, "Why are you driving this truck?" "They told me I had to," I replied. "Is there no other truck available?" he asked. "Nope." "And if you don't drive this one?" "Then I guess I stay home," I said. He nodded and walked off again. 20 minutes later, he returned, slapped a large red out-of-service sticker on the windshield, and said, "This truck has 21 violations. It's not going anywhere until it's repaired. I'm also issuing your company a fine for allowing it on the road in this condition. However, your fuel tax sticker is expired. That's a $10,000 fine for you personally, but I called the local police. they'll handle it with a $1.90 citation instead, which your company should cover." I thanked him as he left, then called my employer to pick me up. The final tally? Over $65,000 in fines, towing fees, and repairs. The next week, the company replaced the entire fleet with leased trucks that included maintenance plans and backup vehicles. They even started washing the trucks twice a month. I stayed with the company for another 2 years, but eventually left for a competitor offering better pay and better maintained equipment. This experience taught me one thing: I won't risk my life or anyone else's for a job. If something isn't safe, I won't do it. In the end, my employer learned an expensive lesson. Sometimes, taking shortcuts just isn't worth it. Story 2. I mentioned in a previous post that my narcissistic father, back in the 1990s, was angry about me living in a camper trailer. But it wasn't because I was using it as a home, he was upset simply because I owned one. He had wanted a camper trailer for years, but never got around to actually buying one. On top of all his other flaws, you could add extreme procrastination to the list. After I moved into my uncle's backyard with a trailer, my parents eventually tracked me down. They forced their way onto the property, took my car keys, and stole my car. That situation escalated to the point where I had to involve the police to resolve it. Not long after, they started demanding I become their unpaid chauffeur again, particularly when they wanted to go out drinking. As you can imagine, that didn't sit well with me either. Eventually, my mother came by to complain about something else. By then, she was pretending to be over the fact that they didn't have my car anymore, but it was obvious she hadn't let it go. On this particular day, she was furious because my father was ranting about my camper trailer again. Apparently, it irritated him that I could simply take it wherever I wanted. My mother told me I should move into an apartment or something just to shut my father up. I told her no. I had an excellent deal living in the trailer. My uncle was barely charging me anything, and all I had to do was help out with yard work on top of the minimal rent and utilities I was paying. There was no way I was giving that up for an apartment. Things escalated when my parents got their hands on another Vista Cruiser, a station wagon capable of towing things like my Chevrolet Caprice had been able to. The Chevrolet Cavalier they had taken from me couldn't tow anything, and the small orange car from the 1970s that my mother had been using was also unsuited for towing. Once they had the new station wagon, my father immediately started planning what he could tow with it. That's when he decided he wanted to take my camper trailer for a camping trip. At first, he treated it as if it was a casual decision he didn't need my approval for. My father, in his typical domineering manner, showed up one day and bluntly told me he was going to use my trailer for camping. I refused. He then tried to order me, as his son, to let him take it during the summer. I stood firm and said no again. The trailer was literally my home, and knowing him, he'd probably park it at his house and never return it. He even attempted his usual tactic of intimidation, which I call his guerrilla act, but I confronted him head-on. It was like two stubborn individuals butting heads, refusing to back down. I told him to his face that he was never getting my trailer and that he should go buy his own. The title was in my name, and I made it clear I wouldn't hesitate to call the police if he tried to take it. As expected, my father resorted to calling me ungrateful and tried to manipulate me with his usual gaslighting tactics. When none of that worked, he eventually left, fuming. My uncle, who had been watching the entire showdown from a nearby window, was highly entertained. He even had popcorn, treating the whole thing like a movie. My father had been the favored child growing up, while my uncle was treated poorly, so anytime my father didn't get his way, my uncle found it hilarious. After being thwarted, my father went out and rented a camper trailer for a few days. But just as quickly as he started, he decided he didn't like camping anymore. It became evident that he only wanted to camp because I had a trailer, and deep down, he probably hoped to claim mine for himself. He always believed that anything I owned was automatically his as well. It took him years to realize that wasn't how things worked. Over time, I learned that anything he borrowed from me after I moved out, I would never see again. That's why I never trusted him with my belongings. I personally didn't feel the need to go camping since I was already living in a trailer. However, I gave it a shot when I became a parent. To be honest, it wasn't that enjoyable. My ex-wife particularly disliked it, but I wouldn't say she was the reason it wasn't fun. I did take the trailer to a couple of family reunions, though, which helped save on motel costs. I wasn't the only one in the family doing this. Several relatives brought their trailers as well. During one mid-1990s reunion, my parents demanded that I let them sleep in the spare bunk in my trailer for free. I firmly refused. That reunion ended up being memorable for all the wrong reasons. My parents were humiliated after doubling down on their complaints about me not giving them my second car. Things escalated to the point where one of my cousins slapped my mother for her poor behavior as a parent. It was an awkward but somewhat vindicating moment. Looking back, I think my parents' obsession with controlling everything I owned stemmed from a deeper sense of entitlement. My father especially seemed to believe he was owed everything I had, even if he had no real claim to it. That sense of entitlement wasn't limited to material possessions, either. It extended to my time and effort. When they didn't get what they wanted, they resorted to manipulative tactics, guilt-tripping, and outright tantrums. That family reunion in the mid-1990s marked a turning point for me in terms of how I interacted with my parents. After being humiliated at the event, they tried to guilt me into apologizing for what they considered my disrespect. But I stood my ground. I had grown tired of their antics, and I wasn't about to let them walk all over me anymore. My refusal to let them stay in my trailer or give them my car wasn't just about keeping my belongings. It was about setting boundaries and reclaiming my independence. My uncle, who had always been more supportive than my parents, became a kind of ally in all of this. He understood what it was like to deal with my father's manipulative behavior, having grown up as the less favored sibling. He often told me stories about how my father had always been coddled, while he, as the younger brother, had been left to fend for himself. It gave me some perspective on why my father behaved the way he did, though it didn't excuse his actions. Over time, I learned how to navigate my parents' behavior more effectively. I stopped giving them opportunities to take advantage of me. For instance, I became more cautious about sharing details of my life or my possessions. I also started leaning on my uncle for advice whenever they tried to stir up drama. He had a knack for pointing out their patterns of manipulation and helping me come up with strategies to deal with them. As for the camper trailer, it remained my home for several years. It wasn't just a place to live, it symbolized my independence and resilience. Despite all the challenges with my parents, I managed to hold on to it and make the most of the situation. The trailer even came in handy during tough times, like when I needed a place to stay while transitioning between jobs or when I wanted to avoid the high cost of traditional housing. Eventually, I moved on from living in the trailer and found more permanent housing, but the lessons I learned during those years stayed with me. I learned how to set boundaries, stand up for myself, and recognize manipulative behavior. Those experiences, though difficult at the time, helped shape who I am today. In hindsight, I can see how much my parents' behavior reflected their own insecurities and unresolved issues. While I don't excuse their actions, I've reached a point where I no longer let their behavior dictate my happiness or choices. The camper trailer story is just one chapter in a long history of family dynamics, but it's one that taught me some of the most valuable lessons about standing my ground and staying true to myself. Story 3. This is a pretty old story. It happened back in 2018 when I used to work as a junior watchmaker and salesperson for one of the largest malls in Fiji. So during Christmas Eve, this lady, who seemed like she was in her late 40s or early 50s, came rushing up to me with a torn piece of our promotional catalog and asked me if we had the white gold men's bracelet available. As I was working for the watch department, I clearly didn't have any knowledge of the availability of the item, so I said, "Madam, I am not going to be able to confirm that. May I direct you to the jewelry department?" While showing her to the jewelry department, which is like 5 meters away from the department I work at, where 4 of my colleagues were waiting to serve her. I don't know what happened, but this woman started screaming at the top of her voice saying, "I'm a VIP customer. How dare you tell me to go elsewhere to check for the item? It is your job to run and check if it is or is not available. You kids nowadays don't want to do your job and make the customers run around. After which I explained to her that currently I'm alone at this department because the senior staffs went to check on the new deliveries and therefore cannot leave the booth that I was in, and recommending that she checks with the department in charge of it was the best course of action. She didn't seem to care at this point and started screaming for the level manager at the exact moment at which the head of the department I was working for arrived and asked what had happened. I explained the situation and the manager apologized on my behalf and told her I was doing the best to keep the customer service going as the mall is full during Christmas. After which she made it clear that she wanted me fired for not prioritizing her, a VIP customer, over others. The department head, who is a lady who is in her late 50s and has clearly had enough of these kind of customers working at the company for over 20 years, said to the customer that no customer is valued more than the other. All customers are treated equally, and that the company doesn't believe in VIP customers. The entitled woman then tells us that her son works at a higher position at the mall, and that she'd have me and my department head's job for treating her that way. Few weeks go by, and I get transferred to the Mac department as a junior makeup artist. Keep in mind Fiji is a very conservative country, and boys like myself, Indian, chubby and bearded, doing anything related to makeup was a weird thing. Everything was going great in life. I was happy that I had been recognized for my artistic skills by an international company. For your information, Mac only has 2 booths in the entire country. Until the day that same entitled woman comes over to the Mac department to buy some products for a New Year's party. One of my colleagues was attending to her at first until the batch of customers from the monthly Chinese cruise ship came in, and she was the only one who could fluently speak Mandarin and Cantonese, so naturally she asked me to provide assistance to the entitled woman. And as I was trying to be as professional as possible, I said, gladly. Over when entitled woman realized that I am a boy, and the same boy from the previous incident had a dramatic change in her facial expressions. She seemed standoffish, and I asked her, "What can I help you with, madam?" To which she said, "I want to look as beautiful as possible for a New Year's party I have been invited to. Does the party have a theme, or would you like me to recommend whatever that suits you the best?" "Whatever, as long as I don't look like a sick boy." "Okay, madam, these are some of the products I have picked out for you, which I think might enhance your beauty. Would you like to try them on?" "Yay, sure." I proceeded to get clean brushes from the storage compartments of our display cases and apply primer, foundation, contouring, etc., and completed the look with all the products which were added to her basket. She seemed pleased with what I had presented. She asked me to pack all products worth $540 FJD, around $270 USD, to which I did and proceeded to the cash counter, where she paid for the liquid foundation and compact powder foundation and not the other products. She said it's okay, her son will pay for the rest, and tried to walk off with the products, to which I said, "You can only take the items if you have completely paid for them," and I calmly ask for her to return the products if she doesn't plan on paying for them, to which she says, "My son is the branch manager. I should be getting these for free." And as I was done with her lies, I asked her to call her son. This triggered an intense rage, and she threw the bag of cosmetics against the counter, breaking them, and then throwing her handbag at me. Huge mistake, lady. I was not one to take abuse from a random lady, and I called the security, and in accordance with our policy, she was promptly banned from our malls. She sometimes still attempts to shop at our stores. It's actually embarrassing to watch. Justice served. Story 4. Why do women with kids feel so entitled just because they have kids? I, a 30-year-old female, have an autoimmune arthritis condition. I walk with a cane. On my bad days, I can barely walk at all. I have a handicap placard for those days. I had to go grocery shopping a while ago, and I was in no condition to be walking a long way. Not a code red pain day, but definitely up there. If I hadn't been completely out of a few major necessities, I wouldn't have been out at all. When I got there, all the handicap spots were full. but I saw an older gentleman loading his trunk and knew that spot would soon be available. So I pulled up and put on my blinkers and waited. Soon as he was gone, I pulled into the spot, threw up my blue placard, and began hauling myself out of the car. I'm just about ready to close the door when I hear, "Excuse me." I look over and see a teal SUV pulled up behind me. There's this woman in the driver's seat yelling out the open passenger window at me. "Entitled mother, you just took my spot." Me? What? I was waiting behind the other guy. I didn't see you. No, these are handicap spots. They're only for handicapped people. I am literally leaning against my car, cane in hand. I hold up the cane. "I am handicapped, ma'am. I have a permit." She scoffs and pulls away. I decide to just forget about her and begin my hobble walk into the store. I got even more frustrated when I saw there were no electric carts available, so I was forced to grab one of the smaller trolleys and walk. Since I have a hard time pushing a cart one-handed, and the cart offers some support, I put my cane inside the cart. I was only as far as the produce section when I heard a familiar voice. "Hey you." It's the entitled mother. She's pushing one of those big carts that look like cars for the kids. She had an infant and a toddler strapped into the front of the cart, another 2-year-old kid standing, bouncing, in the cart, and yet another child holding her hand walking beside her. He looked 5-ish. I'm bad at telling ages. She is also very pregnant. She stalks up to me with this pissed-off expression. You need to learn to be more respectful. I was waiting for that parking spot, and you stole it." She's talking/yelling over her kids, who are all fussing loudly. Me. "Lady, I didn't see you waiting for that spot. If you were, I apologize." Entitled mother. "I was waiting for it. I needed a spot close to the entrance. Because of you, I had to park all the way towards the back." Well, I said I was sorry. I look over her and her brood real quick. Besides, that was a handicap spot. You can only park there with a permit. Are one of your kids handicapped? No, the spot was for me. I'm pregnant. Lady, you can't use disabled parking just because you're pregnant. Not unless you have some complications that affect your mobility. No, you can use them if you are pregnant too. I always use them. I don't think that's how it's supposed to work, ma'am. You're lucky you haven't gotten a ticket for not having a permit displayed. She huffs. Well, you shouldn't be using it. You're not pregnant, and you clearly don't have kids. No, I'm not pregnant, but I am disabled. This whole conversation I have been leaning on my cart for support. I pull my cane out for her to see. I can barely walk 10 feet without pain. That's why I have a handicap permit. That's no excuse. You can't be in that much pain. I've been up all night with a colicky baby and couldn't keep anything down because of morning sickness. I'm exhausted. My feet are killing me. You don't know what it's like wrangling 4 kids while pregnant. I clearly needed that spot more than you did. I am more than done with this whole argument at this point. Look, lady, I'm in pain, I'm tired, and I want to just finish my shopping so I can go home and try to work up the will to make dinner tonight. I didn't see you waiting for the damn parking spot, and you shouldn't be using it without a permit anyway. Good day. I tried walking away. You selfish brat, you don't know what tired is. I'm going to report you to store security. I'll get them to tow your car. Lady, call security if you want. I'm allowed to park there. I didn't choose to become disabled. But you chose to have kids. It's not my fault you're tired and run down and can't be bothered to walk the extra 200 feet to the door. It's not my fault you chose to get pregnant. You deal with your life. I'll deal with mine. I hobbled off to try to finish my shopping, ignoring her parting comments. That fight gave me just enough adrenaline to get through my trip without falling apart. I had an assistant help load my vehicle, which was undisturbed where I had parked it. I was still pissed when I got home, but it was nothing a long soak in the tub couldn't fix. I still hope she gets ticketed for parking in the handicap spots, but as long as I never see her again, I'll be happy. Story 5. 1 year ago, I was renting a house next to the most unpleasant neighbor I hope to ever experience. The only thing I liked about her was her cat. This freakishly adorable tabby who could grab even the most hardened criminal's heart by the neck. Every time I came home from work, he would sidle up next to me for some tender, loving care, which he never got from my neighbor. As far as I could tell, she just used the poor thing to keep away mice and play, that is, be terrorized by, her toddler grandkids on the weekends. The poor fur baby looked severely underfed and always appreciated the meals I'd leave out for him on our back porch. I have an indoor fur baby of my own, a tailless ball of energy, and one day he managed to escape outside. Luckily, I found him within a few hours, but by the next morning, what jumped on my lap? Not my cat, alas, but a flea. And if my social butterfly cat had fleas, I was positive the next-door fur baby had fleas too. Now, I already had a bitter history with this neighbor. In addition to being a twat rocket to her cat, she'd harassed my older parents when they were helping me move in. Why? Because our U-Haul rental was blocking a dead-end sidewalk in front of my house. My parents are very kind people. My mom has literally been thanked on customer service hotlines for being so sweet. And this lady was berating them needlessly for ruining the community, ranting even longer than they'd been parked, until they eventually moved to an inconvenient and wholly unnecessary distance. Regardless of her twat rocket personality, I figured I'd warn her anyway in the best interest of her fur baby. When I knew she was at home the next day, I knocked on her front door. When she answered, "No, hello, just a scowl," I started to explain that my escaped indoor cat had fleas, and so there was a good possibility that her outdoor cat also had fleas. Immediately she berates me for letting my cat get fleas and snaps that she keeps her house very clean, unlike me. So there is no way her cat has fleas. I just loudly sighed at her and went back home as she continued to yell, "You've never even been in my house, lady, and that's not how fleas work." All week I noticed her cat scratching himself raw and felt so bad for the little guy. I wanted to give him flea medication and a flea bath. But with my neighbor now watching me like a hawk and screeching like a banshee, if I even pet him anymore, I had to leave him alone. But I realized there was something I could do. You see, we shared the same landlord, who was very concerned about household pests and instructed us to call him at the first sight of a bed bug, tick, etc. I also knew that my neighbor was keeping her cat a secret from the landlord to avoid paying the pet rent, as I'd overheard her bragging about this to a friend outside one day. So what do? I called up the landlord to explain the flea situation, and I made sure to add that my neighbor's cat has also been scratching like crazy. There's a pause. "Did you say she has a cat?" "Yes," I assure him. "She definitely has an indoor-outdoor cat." Turns out that my neighbor had harassed our landlord into replacing most of her carpet due to her alleged cat allergy. I don't know why the landlord caved into this, but it wasn't cheap. And now our landlord learned that not only had Madwoman lied about an allergy to score a free renovation, but she hadn't paid pet rent in more than a year. Well, an exterminator gets called, and our landlord himself shows up to oversee the whole thing. We had both received a flyer taped to our front doors, giving notice that he would be coming to our houses on that date. But I may or may not have removed my neighbors so she wouldn't be able to just hide evidence of her cat for a few hours. So our landlord arrives, and I listen gleefully with my window open as my neighbor tries to prevent him and the exterminator from entering. Eventually, she allows them to come inside, where there is obvious evidence of a pet living there. I don't know exactly what transpired between her and the landlord. There must be other stains on her record, being such a nutcase. But a few months later, I had a new next-door neighbor. And guess who Madwoman purposely abandoned during the move? Her poor fur baby, who became a much-loved and flea-free member of our house. Story 6. I'm a 30-year-old posting here because I feel ready to permanently go no contact with my mom. My partner is supportive of this decision, but wants me to ensure it's truly the right choice since it's not something I can easily reverse. I guess I'm just seeking some unbiased opinions to help me consider all aspects of this decision. My mom and I have always had a complicated relationship. My childhood wasn't very pleasant. She was extremely strict, and my parents had a toxic marriage that left me, as the oldest child, bearing the brunt of their emotional immaturity both before and after they divorced. On top of that, I was an undiagnosed neurodivergent child with traits of both attention deficit hyperactivity disorder and autism spectrum disorder, which only added to the challenges. There's so much that's happened, and if I tried to recount everything she's done since my childhood, I'd be writing for days. Fast forward to college, that's where I feel the real decline in our relationship began. I ended up in an abusive relationship for about 2 years. It's not surprising when I reflect on how her parenting conditioned me for such an experience. I wasn't allowed to say no, and I was always expected to prioritize her needs over mine. Toward the end of that abusive relationship, when those around me began to notice what was happening, her idea of helping was to visit me, take me shopping, and tell me I'd feel better with higher self-esteem. Afterward, she left me in my college town, both metaphorically and physically, to handle everything alone. A few weeks later, when things became unbearable, I attempted to end my life. When the attempt failed, I called her the next morning, asking her to come get me. Her first response wasn't concern, it was to criticize the state of the litter boxes in my apartment. I was soon admitted under the Baker Act for a psychiatric evaluation. While in the hospital, as my wrist was being stitched up, she was laughing, joking, and even taking photos for social media. After being released from the center, I moved back in with her, as I had just graduated from college. I got a job at a sushi restaurant where my manager harassed me almost daily. I was too mentally broken to stand up for myself. That summer, I coped by drinking, smoking, and doing whatever I could to numb the pain. My mom, meanwhile, freely shared details about my struggles and my attempt to end my life with anyone who would listen. I remember once shushing her at a restaurant because she was talking so loudly about it in public. Not once did she suggest I seek therapy or proper help. I'll continue in the next message to maintain the word count and flow. A few months later, everything came to a head. One night, she got extremely drunk, a behavior not uncommon for her, and started projecting her fears onto my youngest brother. She rambled about being terrified that he would harm himself and spiraled into a confrontation. This escalated into a massive fight where she demanded to see my phone, accusing me of texting people about her. This was a major trigger for me since she used to go through our phones in high school. I refused because I was 25 at the time, and it was a gross invasion of my privacy. Her response was unforgettable. She screamed, "You deserve everything that happened to you because you're crazy," before storming out and driving off completely drunk. When she returned, we saw her entering the driveway and ran out to stop her. She nearly hit my youngest brother with her car before I managed to jump through her window and grab the keys. The next day, instead of apologizing, she sulked and accused us of ganging up on her, completely ignoring the danger she had put everyone in. After that incident, I distanced myself and moved away for graduate school. Things were relatively quiet during that time. Once I graduated, we attempted to reconnect through therapy. Unfortunately, the sessions turned into platforms for her to vent about unrelated annoyances in her life, avoiding discussions about our past or the issues we truly needed to address. While we managed to maintain a somewhat pleasant relationship for a while, it didn't last long. I later moved to a state where my grandmother, who I call Nana, lived. I had always been close to her growing up and wanted to reconnect. However, this relationship also soured after I came out as non-binary and disclosed my neurodivergence. My grandmother, a stubborn woman much like my mom, wanted little to do with me after that. Things worsened with my Nana when she decided to sell the family house, a home that had always been considered a shared family treasure. While I understood her desire to downsize after my grandfather's passing, her refusal to consider alternative arrangements was deeply hurtful. My mom even suggested my partner and I move in and take care of the house, but my Nana flat out rejected the idea. When I told my mom that I no longer wanted to have contact with my grandmother, she didn't react directly. Instead, she casually responded the next day to thank me for a birthday card I had sent earlier, completely avoiding the conversation about Nana. The next significant contact I had with my mom was an email she sent on my 30th birthday. It read, "I won't make this long. I think of you every day and miss knowing you. I wish I could be celebrating 30 years of being your mom with a call and sending the gifts sitting and waiting. I'm not sure if this will ever be something we fix and put behind us. I love you dearly, and it hurts to not be in touch. I will respect your space, but I finally realized today as your mom, I couldn't let your birthday go by without telling you I love you. I do. Mom." This message felt typical of her, emotional but devoid of accountability. The most frustrating parts were the passive-aggressive comments, like mentioning gifts, sitting and waiting, as if to guilt me into responding, and her acknowledgement of contemplating whether to express her love on my birthday. I had never explicitly asked for space, yet she framed it as though she was respecting boundaries I hadn't set. As if all this wasn't enough, I recently learned from my sister that my grandmother did end up moving in with my mom and is still planning to sell the house. It felt like the final slap in the face, reaffirming that my efforts to make amends or maintain a connection with them were one-sided and futile. At this point, I'm over it. I feel like I've been forced into a parental role in this relationship, constantly trying to manage her emotions and prevent her from taking things out on my siblings. But I've realized that I can't keep sacrificing my mental health out of fear for what she might do to others. She has consistently proven that she's neither emotionally nor psychologically supportive of me. Instead, she brings negativity into my life, enabling my grandmother's harmful attitudes and never prioritizing my well-being. I'm ready to walk away from this relationship for good. It's not easy, but I know I deserve better.